Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Be sure to check out Dragon Shield for all of the best accessories to protect your decks. TCG Player for cards at great prices while supporting local game stores. And Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. Our patron Pyro is back for another game. He brought back fan favorite Kaalia, and the Playing with Power team wants to bring some spicy decks of their own. Our newest playmat is available for pre-order. This playmat is only available to purchase through the month of September, then it is gone forever. Check out the link in the description below to purchase yours and help out the channel in the process. Our patrons are able to order the playmat early, and some tiers even get discounts on merchandise. So be sure to sign up to our Patreon and get early access to merchandise and get them at a discount too. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Zach piloting Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow. This is Zach's spicy deck because it is a budget version of Yuriko. It seeks to attack with ninjas, get multiple Yuriko triggers, and drain out his opponents all on a budget. Zach's opening hand contains an Exotic Orchard, Brainstorm, Looter Ilkor, Unsubstantiate, Counterspell, Dimir Infiltrator, and his London Mulligan is a Mana Leak. Next, we have Pyro piloting Kaalia of the Vast. This is a Mardu Blitz deck. This deck seeks to attack with Kaalia and cheat out massive threats to win the game. Pyro's opening hand contains a Jeweled Lotus, Silence, Master of Cruelties, Demonic Tutor, Gemstone Caverns, Jeska Thrice Reborn, and a Reflecting Pool. After that, we have Ryan piloting Arcum Dagson. This deck uses its commander to cheat out artifacts and use them to go infinite to win the game. Ryan's opening hand contains a Gemstone Caverns, Hedron Crawler, Isochron Scepter, Solve the Equation, Preordain, and 2 Snow-Covered Islands. Finally, we have Mike piloting Korvold, Fate-Cursed King. This deck seeks to create a lot of treasure through cards like Dockside Extortionist and draw a lot of cards through its commander. Mike's opening hand contains a Nurturing Peatland, Viscera Seer, Jeweled Lotus, Tender Wall, Autumn's Veil, Findhorn Elves, and his London Mulligan is a Mox Diamond. Without further ado, let's begin this yearning, yelling, yammering of yellow youngsters. Zach won the Milk Crate Challenge and gets to start us off. But Pyro and Ryan have a pre-game action. Both put Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Jeska Thrice Reborn and a Snow-Covered Island respectively. Zach draws a card for turn and plays an Exotic Orchard. He passes. Pyro draws a card for turn and plays a Reflecting Pool. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks his Jeweled Lotus to cast Kaalia. In response, Zach casts Brainstorm, looking for an answer. He draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Sadly, no one else has a response, and Kaalia resolves. Pyro passes the turn. Ryan draws and plays a Snow-Covered Island. He casts a Hedron Crawler. Ryan passes. Mike draws and plays a Nurturing Peatland. He taps his Peatland to cast Elves of Deep Shadow. Mike ends his turn. Zach draws and casts a Slitherblade. He casts a Memnite. Zach passes. Pyro draws and casts a Demonic Tutor. He fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Deadly Rollick for its alternate cost, targeting Ryan's Hedron Crawler. The table scratches its head a bit, and Hedron Crawler gets exiled. He attacks Ryan with Kaalia. Kaalia triggers, and Pyro puts Master of Cruelties onto the battlefield. Ryan sighs, and everyone now realizes why Pyro removed Ryan's creature. Master of Cruelties connects, Ryan goes to 1, then Kaalia connects, and Ryan dies. The rest of the table, mouth agape, wondering what they are going to do now, wave goodbye to Ryan, and Pyro passes the turn. Mike draws and plays a Windswept Heath. He casts a Jeweled Lotus of his own. He cracks his Jeweled Lotus and taps his Nurturing Peatland and Elves of Deep Shadow to help cast his commander, Korvold, Fate-Cursed King. Korvold enters the battlefield, and with the trigger on the stack, Mike cracks his Windswept Heath and pays a life. Korvold triggers, gets a +1/+1 counter, and Mike draws a card. Mike fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. Then Korvold's ETB resolves, Mike sacks his Nurturing Peatland, Korvold gets a counter, and Mike draws. Mike casts a Mox Diamond, discarding Ancient Tomb. He casts a Tender Wall. Mike ends his turn. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Pyro with Slitherblade. Pyro takes it, and Zach passes the turn. Pyro draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He moves to combat and attacks Zach with Kaalia. Kaalia triggers, and Pyro puts a Hellkite Tyrant onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Zach. Zach takes it all, Hellkite triggers, and Pyro gains control of Zach's Memnite. All through, Pyro passes. Mike draws and starts off by tapping his Elves of Deep Shadow to cast Viscera Seer. He casts a Findhorn Elves. He sacks Findhorn Elves to Viscera Seer. Korvold triggers, gets a counter, and Mike draws. Then Mike scries 1. He sacks Elves of Deep Shadow to Viscera Seer. Korvold triggers, gets a counter, and Mike draws again. He scries 1 again. He plays a Command Tower for turn. He casts an Elvish Mystic. Mike passes the turn. At the end of Mike's turn, Zach casts Trickery Charm. He looks at the top 4 of his library and rearranges. Zach draws and plays a Swamp. He passes. At the end of Zach's turn, Pyro casts a Vampiric Tutor. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Pyro draws and plays an Access Tunnel. He taps his Mana Confluence to activate Access Tunnel, targeting his Master of Cruelties. He attacks Mike with Master of Cruelties. Mike cannot block, Master connects, and Mike goes to 1 life. Pyro passes the turn. Mike draws and floats mana from his Elvish Mystic. He then sacks it to Viscera Seer. Korvold triggers, gets a counter, and Mike draws. Mike then scries 1. He casts a Deathrite Shaman. He sacks his Deathrite to Viscera Seer. Korvold gets a counter, and Mike draws. Then Mike scries 1 again. He sacks his Tinderwall for 2 red. Korvold gets a counter, and Mike draws. He sacks Viscera Seer to itself. Korvold gets a counter, and Mike draws. Then Mike scries 1. Mike casts Jeska's Will. He adds 5 red and exiles Mana Crypt, Cabal Ritual, and Entomb off of the top of his library. He plays an Emergent Zone for turn. He cracks Emergent Zone. Korvold gets a counter, and Mike draws. He casts Cabal Ritual with Threshold. He adds 5 black. He casts Entomb. He fetches up a Dockside Extortionist into his graveyard. He casts Simian Spirit Guide to have a blocker. He casts Mana Crypt. He attacks Pyro with Korvold. Korvold triggers, and Mike sacks his Mox Diamond. Korvold gets a counter, and Mike draws. Before blocks, Mike casts Slaughter Pact, targeting Hellkite Tyrant. In response, Pyro casts Deflecting Swat for its alternate cost, targeting Slaughter Pact. Swat resolves, and Pyro redirects Slaughter Pact to Mike's own Simian Spirit Guide. Spirit Guide dies, and Pyro blocks with its Hellkite Tyrant. Hellkite Tyrant dies, and in his second main phase, Mike casts an Arcane Signet. Mike passes the turn. At the end of Mike's turn, Zach casts Unsubstantiate, targeting Kaalia. Kaalia bounces, and Zach moves to his turn. Zach draws and plays an island. Zach passes. Pyro draws and plays a Spectator Seeding. He attacks Mike with Memnite. Mike sighs, declares no blocks, and dies. In his second main phase, Pyro recasts Kaalia. In response, Zach casts Counterspell, countering Kaalia. Pyro passes the turn. At the end of Pyro's turn, Zach delves away some of his graveyard to cast Murderous Cut, targeting Master of Cruelties. Master dies, and the turn passes to Zach. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Pyro with Slitherblade. Pyro declares no blocks, and Zach activates his commander, Yuriko the Tygo Shadow, bouncing Slitherblade and putting it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Pyro takes it, and Yuriko triggers. Zach reveals an island into his hand. In his second main phase, Zach plays an island for turn. He casts a Looter Il-Kor. Zach ends his turn. Pyro draws and casts Diabolic Tutor. He fetches up a card into his hand. He taps Mana Confluence to cast Reanimate, targeting Master of Cruelties. Master of Cruelties enters the battlefield, and Pyro loses 5 life. Pyro passes the turn. Zach draws and casts Wingcrafter. It resolves, and he soul bonds it with Yuriko, giving both creatures flying. He attacks Pyro with Yuriko and Looter. Pyro takes it, then Looter and Yuriko trigger. Zach reveals a Thieves Guild Enforcer into his hand, and Pyro loses 1. Zach then draws and discards through Looter. Zach plays an island for turn and passes. Pyro draws and plays a Swamp. He casts Grand Abolisher. In response, Zach sacrifices Looter Il-Kor to help cast Abjure, countering Abolisher. Next, Pyro taps his Mana Confluence to activate Access Tunnel, targeting his Master of Cruelties. He attacks Zach with Master of Cruelties. Zach cannot block, and Master connects. Zach then goes to 1 life. All through, Pyro passes. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Pyro with Yuriko. Pyro takes it, and Yuriko triggers. Zach reveals a Reality Shift into his hand, and Pyro loses 2. In his second main phase, Zach recasts Slitherblade. He casts a Gingerbrute. Zach passes the turn. Pyro draws and casts Silence. In response, Zach casts Reality Shift, targeting Memnite. Memnite is exiled, and Pyro manifests the top card of his library. Then Silence resolves. Unfortunately thwarted, Pyro passes the turn. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Pyro with Yuriko. Pyro takes it, Yuriko triggers, and Zach reveals a River of Tears into his hand. In his second main phase, he plays River of Tears for turn. He transmutes Dimir Infiltrator. He fetches up a Drown in the Loch into his hand. Zach ends his turn. Pyro draws and casts Phyrexian Reclamation. He pays 2 life to activate Phyrexian Reclamation, returning Grand Abolisher from his graveyard to his hand. He taps his Mana Confluence to cast Grand Abolisher. In response, Zach casts Drown in the Loch, countering Abolisher again. With nothing else, Pyro passes to Zach. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Pyro with everything. Pyro takes it all, and Yuriko triggers. Zach reveals a Phantasmal Image into his hand, and Pyro loses 2. Zach ends his turn. Pyro draws and casts a Mana Crypt. He pays 2 life to activate Phyrexian Reclamation, returning Grand Abolisher yet again from his graveyard to his hand. He casts Grand Abolisher again. In response, Zach casts Submerge, targeting Pyro's Manifest card. He puts it onto the top of his library. Then Grand Abolisher resolves. With nothing else, and Zach running out of options, Pyro passes the turn. Zach draws and casts Impulse. He looks at the top 4 of his library, puts 1 into his hand, and the rest on bottom. He casts a Brainstone. He attacks Pyro with everything. He activates Ginger Brute, making it unblockable. Pyro takes it, and Yuriko triggers. In response, Zach sacrifices Brainstone. He draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Yuriko's trigger resolves, and Zach reveals a phantasmal image into his hand, and Pyro loses 2 life. All through, and seeing the writing on the wall, Zach passes the turn. During his upkeep, Pyro wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and plays a Dragon Skull Summit for turn. He activates Access Tunnel, targeting his Grand Abolisher. He attacks Zach with Grand Abolisher. Zach cannot block, takes the hit, dies, and Pyro wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a game. Congrats to Pyro on his win. His deck proved once again that cheating out huge threats onto the table was more than the team could handle. Ryan was taken out so early, he never even got to see turn 2. The most valuable card in tonight's game goes to Master of Cruelties. This card is the spiciest card in most Kaalia lists and was pivotal in Pyro's victory tonight. He was able to put each opponent down to 1 life, and they never had a chance to recover before Pyro closed the door on each of them. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Alright, Patreon shoutout time. I'd like to give a shout out to Alana Kexes, Salt, Jonas Kofoed, Ryan Wright, Kvitborn Kong Valamon. Ooh, that's brutal. Sorry about that. Natalia Rubinovitz, Ivan, Thumerian Descendant, Frapril, Connor Holtz, Nathan Smith, Elijah Miller, Pyro, Dark, Mr. Doc Profoliol McSwaggy Pants the Third. Oh boy. Philip Hickey, Jacob Cromer, Brad Tobin, Matt Wingrove, Delph Driz, Dante, Jared Smith, Trey Payne, Rakeko, Zods, James Cody Halley, Spielrahu, CZ, Taylor Corun, Nick, and Liam. Thank you all very much for your support.